In the history of warfare, there is one universal rule. If you are outnumbered, you find more men, you secure more weapons, you find higher ground. You do whatever it takes to close the mathematical gap between your army and the enemy. But in the 7th chapter of the book of Judges, God breaks this rule entirely. He takes an army that is already desperately outnumbered, already afraid, and already lacking resources, and he subjects it to a systematic, almost incomprehensible series of subtractions. This is the story of Gideon. If you grew up in a faith tradition, you probably know the basic outline: a man, a fleece, 300 soldiers, and a midnight victory with trumpets and broken jars. It is usually taught as a story of bravery, a classic underdog tale where the few defeat the many. But when you look closely at the biblical text, a completely different picture emerges. This is not a story about elite warriors. It is not a story about finding the bravest, most alert, or most highly trained soldiers in Israel. It is a story about the systematic dismantling of human self-reliance. To understand what is actually happening, we have to look at the mathematics of this deliverance. Gideon has managed to gather 32,000 men from the tribes of Israel. That sounds like a large number. But they are camped on a hillside, looking down into a valley. And what they see in that valley is terrifying. The text tells us the Midianite army is spread out below them, as thick as locusts. Their camels are impossible to count, like the sand on the seashore. 32,000 untrained men against a professional, overwhelming force. They are outgunned, outmatched, and completely terrified. And it is in this exact moment, when Gideon needs reassurance, that God speaks to him. Judges chapter 7, verse 2. God says, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand." Too many. Imagine hearing those words. Your hands are shaking. Your men are terrified. You are looking at a mathematical impossibility. And God looks at your tiny, frightened militia and says, "It is too big." But God does not stop there. He explains exactly why he is about to dismantle Gideon's army. He says, "Lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" This is the central tension of the entire story. God is not primarily worried about the Midianite army. He is worried about the human heart. He knows exactly what will happen if 32,000 Israelites defeat a massive Midianite coalition. They will write songs about their own bravery. They will build monuments to their own tactical genius. They will forget the God who delivered them, and they will quietly slip back into the illusion that they are strong enough to save themselves. God knows that our deepest problem is not our weakness. Our deepest problem is the illusion of our strength. We are constantly tempted to believe that we can save ourselves, fix ourselves, and secure our own futures if we just try hard enough or gather enough resources. So God decides to take Gideon's resources away, not to punish him, not to crush him, but to bring him to the end of himself, so that when the deliverance comes, it will be undeniable. The reduction of Gideon's army is not a strange military strategy. It is an autopsy of human pride. God is about to reduce 32,000 men down to an absurd fraction. But before we can understand how God breaks this army apart, we have to understand the trauma that forced them to gather in the first place. Because Gideon's fear did not come from nowhere. To understand why Gideon and his men are so terrified, we have to look back at the beginning of the 6th chapter of Judges. The book of Judges does not describe a golden age in Israel's history. It describes a dark, violent, downward spiral. It is a repeated cycle of rebellion, oppression, crying out, and deliverance. And in chapter 6, the oppression comes in the form of the Midianites. But the Midianites are not a traditional empire. They do not come to conquer cities, set up governors, and collect steady taxes. They are a massive, nomadic coalition, and their warfare is psychological and agricultural. The biblical text tells us that for 7 years, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the people of the east would wait until Israel had sown their seed. They would wait for the crops to grow, and then, right at the moment of harvest, they would sweep into the land. The Bible uses a very specific image to describe them. It says they came like locusts. They brought their tents and their camels, which the text says were without number, and they devoured the produce of the earth. They took the sheep, the ox, and the donkey. They left no sustenance in Israel. This was not just a military occupation. It was systematic starvation. Imagine the psychological toll of this cycle. Every year, you do the grueling work of plowing and planting. You watch the crops grow. And just as you are about to gather the food that will keep your family alive through the winter, the horizon turns black with an invading horde that consumes everything you have built, year after year, for 7 years. This breaks a nation. Judges chapter 6, verse 2, describes the result. It says that because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. The children of Israel, living in the promised land, have been reduced to hiding in holes in the earth. They are a traumatized, impoverished, terrified people. This is the reality behind the 32,000 men Gideon eventually gathers. When we read that number, 32,000, we tend to picture an ancient army. We picture matching shields, sharpened spears, and organized ranks. But these are not professional soldiers. These are starving farmers. They are men who have lived in caves for 7 years. They are fathers who have watched their children go hungry. They have finally reached a breaking point, gathered whatever crude farming tools and weapons they could find, and marched out to the hill country. And when they look down into the valley of Jezreel, they see the combined forces of the east. A coalition so massive, the text simply calls it an innumerable multitude, 32,000 traumatized men against an endless sea of seasoned raiders. It is military suicide. If you are going to lead a broken, frightened militia into an impossible battle, you need a commander of extraordinary charisma. You need a fearless warrior who can stand in front of 32,000 trembling men and project absolute, unshakable confidence. You need a hero who is unafraid of the dark, but that is not how God works. Against this massive threat, God does not raise up a fearless general. He does not choose a seasoned veteran who knows how to rally the troops. Instead, God goes looking for a man who is paralyzed by the exact same fear as everyone else. A man who is so afraid of the Midianites that he is actively hiding at the very moment God calls his name. When we first meet the man who will lead this impossible battle, he is not sharpening a sword. He is not rallying the tribes. He is hiding. Judges chapter 6, verse 11, gives us a very specific, almost tragic visual detail. It says Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. If you understand ancient agriculture, that sentence is full of tension. Threshing wheat is a job meant for the open air. You do it on a high, flat threshing floor, where the wind can catch the chaff and blow it away while the heavy grain falls to the ground. A winepress is the exact opposite. It is a sunken pit, usually carved into stone, designed to contain liquid. Trying to thresh wheat inside a winepress is suffocating. It is cramped, dusty, and inefficient. But Gideon is doing it anyway, because a winepress keeps you out of sight. He is terrified that a Midianite raiding party will see the dust, ride over the hill, and take his food. This is the man God chooses. And the way God introduces himself to this frightened farmer is one of the most striking moments in the historical books. The angel of the Lord appears to him and says, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." A mighty man of valor, spoken to a man covered in dust, cowering in a hole in the ground. It sounds almost like a joke, but God is not mocking him. God is speaking to what he is about to form, not just what Gideon currently is. Gideon's response is immediate, and it is entirely rooted in trauma. He does not fall to his knees in immediate faith. He argues. He says, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us?" Gideon knows the stories of the Exodus. He knows the history of the Red Sea. But those stories feel empty in the face of a 7-year starvation campaign. He believes God has abandoned them, But God does not debate him. God simply looks at him and says, "Go in this might of yours, and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" Gideon protests again. He explains that his clan is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and he is the absolute least in his father's house. He is the bottom of the tribal hierarchy. He has no wealth, no political standing, and no military training. And that is exactly the point. If God wanted a predictable military victory, he would have gone to a trained commander. But God is setting up a scenario where human boasting will be mathematically impossible. To do that, he starts by choosing a leader whose weakness is undeniable. God assures Gideon. He promises his presence. And slowly, agonizingly, Gideon begins to step out. He tears down a pagan altar. He sends out messengers. He blows the ram's horn. And to his absolute surprise, the tribes actually respond. 32,000 men show up to follow him. For a brief moment, Gideon must have felt a surge of hope. He is still deeply afraid, but at least he is not alone. He looks around and sees a militia. He has numbers. He has a physical buffer between himself and the terrifying horde in the valley. He has finally secured a small measure of safety. And it is in that exact moment, with the enemy waiting below, and Gideon's fragile confidence hanging by a thread, that God gives him his first major command as a general. God does not tell him to attack. God tells him to turn around, look at the army he just managed to build, and tell them to leave. Imagine standing in front of 32,000 men. You have just sent messengers across the country. You have blown the ram's horn. You have convinced these traumatized farmers to leave their hiding places and form a militia. And now, you have to stand in front of them and tell them that most of them need to go home. Judges chapter 7, verse 3, records the exact command. God tells Gideon to proclaim in the ears of the people, "Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return and hurry away from Mount Gilead." To a modern reader, this sounds like a strange military tactic. Why would a commander actively invite his soldiers to desert right before a battle? But to an ancient Israelite, this was not a new idea. It was a matter of biblical law. Hundreds of years earlier, before Israel even entered the Promised Land, Moses laid out the rules of warfare in the book of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 8, Moses gave a very specific instruction for military officers. Before any battle, they were supposed to stand before the army and ask a question. "Is there any man who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own." Scripture understands human psychology. Fear is profoundly contagious. Panic in the ranks is more dangerous than an enemy on the horizon. If a few men break and run, the entire line will collapse. So God tells Gideon to invoke the law of Moses. Give the fearful permission to leave. We do not know how Gideon felt when he made this announcement. We know he was struggling with his own fear. It is entirely possible that part of him wanted to turn around and leave with them, but he obeys. He makes the proclamation, and the result is staggering. The text says that 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. More than 2/3 of the army walked away. Imagine the psychological weight of that moment. Try to picture the scene on the hillside. You are one of the 10,000 who decided to stay. You look around, and you watch 22,000 of your brothers, your neighbors, and your friends pack up their meager supplies and walk back down the mountain. The camp grows quiet. The footprint of the army shrinks dramatically, and all the while, the Midianite coalition is still sitting in the valley below, vast and unmoving. The mathematics of the battle have just gone from desperate to absurd. 32,000 against an innumerable horde was already a suicide mission. 10,000 is barely a skirmish line. But pause for a second and see what God is doing. God is not just reducing numbers. He is stripping away the illusion of safety. When Gideon had 32,000 men, he had a crowd. A crowd creates a false sense of security. Even if the men are terrified, simply standing shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other people makes you feel like you have a chance. God removes the crowd. He removes the psychological comfort of numbers. He is forcing Gideon and the 10,000 who remain to realize that their survival cannot depend on their own mass. You would think that this massive reduction would be enough. Gideon is left with a fraction of his force. These 10,000 men are the ones who did not walk away. They are the ones willing to stand their ground. Surely, this is the core group God will use, but God speaks to Gideon again. And what he says next introduces the most famous, and perhaps the most deeply misunderstood, test in the entire book of Judges. God looks at the 10,000 men and says, "The people are still too many." He tells Gideon to take them down to the water. And what happens at the water is almost universally taught as a test of military skill. But if we read the text carefully, we discover it is doing something entirely different. 10,000 men stand on the hillside. They are the brave ones, the ones who refused to walk away when the fearful were given permission to leave. You might expect God to look at this dedicated remnant and say, "Now we are ready." Instead, God says to Gideon, "The people are still too many." Judges chapter 7, verse 4. God tells Gideon to take the men down to the water, and there he will test them. What happens next is one of the most famous and perhaps most misunderstood moments in the Old Testament. If you have heard this story taught, you have probably heard it explained like this. The men reach the water. Most of them drop to their knees, put their faces in the stream, and drink. But a small group, 300 men, crouch down, scoop the water with their hands, and lap it up while keeping their eyes on the horizon. The usual explanation is that these 300 were chosen because they were alert. They were watching for the enemy. They were the ancient equivalent of elite special forces, maintaining situational awareness while the rest of the army was careless. It is a great motivational point. But there is a problem. The biblical text does not actually say that. Read the text carefully. The Bible never praises the 300 for their alertness. It never mentions them keeping one hand on their swords. It never says they were looking out for the Midianites. In fact, the text uses a very specific image to describe them, and it is not a flattering one. God tells Gideon, "Everyone who laps the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set by himself." 300 men put their hands to their mouths and lap like dogs. 9,700 men kneel down to drink normally. In the ancient Near East, comparing a man to a dog was not a compliment. It was not a picture of discipline or military readiness. It was a picture of something undignified, frantic, or desperate. Why would God choose the men who drank like dogs? Some scholars argue that the 300 were actually the most fearful, scooping water nervously and drinking in a panic. Other scholars suggest the test was entirely arbitrary. But if we look back at God's original stated purpose in verse 2, the real reason becomes clear. God said the army was too large because Israel would boast, saying, "My own hand has saved me." If God used this water test to select the 300 bravest, most alert, most elite warriors in Israel, he would be defeating his own purpose. If 300 elite soldiers defeated the Midianites, they would definitely boast. They would say, "We won because we were the best. We won because we were the alert ones. We won because of our superior tactics." God is not looking for a special forces unit. He is looking for a fraction. He designs a test that isolates a tiny, strange minority, 300 out of 10,000. God does not choose the 300 because they are superior. He chooses them because there are only 300 of them. He is systematically removing every possible reason for human pride. He is stripping away the numbers, and he is stripping away the prestige. Gideon is now left with less than 1% of the army he started with. 300 farmers who drink like dogs, standing against an innumerable horde of professional raiders. The mathematics of deliverance have reached their absolute breaking point. Gideon has obeyed. He has sent the thousands away. But as night falls over the camp, he is standing on the edge of the valley, and the reality of what he is about to do must have been terrifying. He is holding a fractured remnant. He is facing certain death. God knows exactly how terrified Gideon is, and he does not rebuke him for it. Instead, in the middle of the night, God does something deeply unexpected. He does not hand Gideon a sword. He invites him to listen to a dream. Night has fallen over the valley of Jezreel. Gideon is sitting in the dark with 300 men. Down below, the fires of the Midianite coalition stretch across the horizon. The text reminds us the enemy is spread across the valley like locusts. Gideon has done everything God asked. He has dismantled his own army. He has watched nearly 30,000 of his own soldiers walk away. He holds a microscopic remnant, and he is terrified. We know he is terrified because of what God says to him next. In Judges chapter 7, verse 9, God tells Gideon to arise and go down against the camp, for he has given it into his hand. If the story stopped there, it would be a standard military command. But the very next sentence is one of the most tender moments in the Old Testament. God says, "But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened." God does not rebuke Gideon for his fear. He does not demand perfect courage. God knows exactly what he has put Gideon through. He knows that stripping away the army has left this farmer feeling completely exposed. So God offers a concession. He offers a stepping stone. If you are afraid, do not attack yet. Just go down and listen. Under the cover of darkness, Gideon and his servant creep down the hillside. They move quietly until they reach the very edge of the armed outposts. And as they crouch in the shadows, they overhear two Midianite guards talking in the night. One guard is telling the other about a nightmare he just had. He says he dreamed that a cake of barley bread tumbled into the Midianite camp. It rolled all the way to a tent, struck it so hard that the tent fell and turned it completely upside down. To a modern reader, a tumbling loaf of bread sounds almost comical. It does not sound like a terrifying military omen, but in the ancient Near East, barley carried a very specific meaning. Barley was the grain of the poor. It was the cheapest, lowest quality food available. It was what you ate when your good crops had been stolen or destroyed. It was the food of the starving. The Midianites were wealthy, mobile raiders. They ate the fine wheat they stole from Israel. The Israelites were the peasants, hiding in caves, surviving on barley. The dream is highly symbolic. The starving, impoverished peasants are about to crush the massive, well-fed encampment. But what matters even more is how the second Midianite guard interprets the dream. He listens to his friend, and then he says, "This is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand." Pause for a second and look at the reversal that just happened. For 7 years, the Israelites have been paralyzed by the Midianites. Gideon himself was hiding in a winepress just a few chapters earlier. He was convinced that the enemy was invincible and that God had abandoned Israel. But standing in the dark, overhearing this conversation, Gideon makes a stunning discovery. The Midianites are terrified of him. This massive, innumerable horde is having nightmares about a farmer from Manasseh. God did not give Gideon a vision of angels to calm his heart. He let Gideon overhear the terror of his enemies. God showed him that the psychological warfare had completely flipped. The victory was already secured in the minds of the Midianites before a single weapon was drawn. The text says that as soon as Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. The fear finally breaks. He climbs back up the mountain. He wakes the 300 men. He tells them to arise, because the Lord has given the host of Midian into their hand. Gideon is finally ready to lead. He organizes the 300 into 3 companies. But as he prepares them for the midnight raid, the tactical logic of the story shatters one final time. He has reduced his army. He has conquered his fear. But the weapons he is about to hand out to his men make absolutely no military sense. Gideon divides his 300 men into 3 companies of 100. He is preparing for a midnight raid against an innumerable coalition. If you are planning a nocturnal ambush in the ancient world, you need 2 things. You need absolute silence, and you need close quarters weapons. You need daggers, short swords, and shields. But Judges chapter 7, verse 16, describes the strangest arsenal in the history of warfare. The text says Gideon put into the hands of all of them trumpets and empty jars, with torches inside the jars. Notice the exact phrasing, into the hands of all of them. Let us look carefully at these three objects. First, the trumpet. This is not a brass military bugle. It is a shofar, a hollowed-out ram's horn. In ancient Israel, the shofar was not a weapon of physical destruction. It was an instrument of declaration. It was blown to announce the year of Jubilee. It was blown to gather the assembly for worship. It was blown to announce that the presence of God was moving. Second, the empty clay jar. In the ancient Near East, an earthen pitcher was the most common, ordinary, fragile item in a household. It was baked dirt, used for carrying water or storing grain. It was heavy, and it shattered easily. Third, the torch. A simple source of fire, hidden inside the empty clay jar so its light could not be seen in the dark. A trumpet, a clay jar, a torch. Now, pause for a second and look at the physical mechanics of this command. If a soldier is holding a ram's horn to his mouth with one hand and carrying a large clay jar concealing a burning torch in his other hand, what is he not holding? He is not holding a sword. He is not holding a shield. God has not only reduced the size of the army to a microscopic fraction, he has systematically disarmed them. Remember the central tension of this entire story. God told Gideon the army was too large, lest Israel boast and say, "My own hand has saved me." God is so determined to protect Israel from the deadly illusion of their own strength that he ensures their hands are literally full of things that cannot shed blood. They cannot boast about their swordsmanship because they are not holding swords. They cannot boast about their lethal tactics because they are holding baked dirt. The objects God chooses are not weapons of violence. They are symbols of theology. The clay jar is one of the most consistent biblical images for human frailty. We are formed from the dust of the ground. We are fragile. We break easily under pressure. The torch represents the fire of God's presence, and the trumpet represents the loud declaration of his arrival. God is teaching Gideon and the 300 men that their primary role in this battle is not to fight. Their role is to hold the light, to embrace their own fragility, and to declare the presence of the Lord. It is an absolute reversal of human military logic. To secure this deliverance, they do not need impenetrable armor. They need to be willing to be broken. Gideon gives his final instructions. He tells the men to look at him, to wait for his signal, and to do exactly as he does. Under the cover of complete darkness, the 300 men quietly spread out. They walk into the night, forming a massive, invisible ring around the perimeter of the Midianite camp. It is the beginning of the middle watch. The enemy guards have just been changed. The vast camp is asleep. 300 farmers stand on the edge of the valley. They are vastly outnumbered. They are entirely disarmed. They are holding nothing but fragile clay and hidden fire. And what happens next changes the way we understand the nature of spiritual warfare. 300 men are standing in the pitch black. They are spread out in a massive ring around the perimeter of the Midianite camp. The text tells us it is the beginning of the middle watch. That means it is around midnight. The enemy guards have just rotated. The vast, innumerable army is deep in sleep. Gideon is holding a ram's horn and a clay pitcher. Inside the pitcher, a torch is burning, entirely hidden from view. The tension in the dark must have been suffocating. One dropped jar, one loud footstep, and the element of surprise is completely lost. But the men wait. They watch Gideon. Then, the silence breaks. Gideon lifts the ram's horn to his mouth and blows. At the exact same moment, he smashes the clay jar. Instantly, the 300 men do exactly the same thing. Imagine the sensory overload. In the dead of night, in a valley that acts like an acoustic bowl, the sudden, violent sound of 300 large clay jars shattering all at once. Before the Midianites can even open their eyes, the absolute darkness is pierced by a ring of fire. 300 torches suddenly blazing in the night. And then comes the sound. 300 ram's horns blowing a continuous, deafening blast, followed by a massive, unified shout. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Down in the valley, the psychological effect is catastrophic. The Midianites wake up in sheer terror. They hear the shattering crash, they see the ring of fire, and they hear the blast of the trumpets. In the disorientation of the night, a ring of 300 torches looks like the vanguard of a massive, overwhelming army. Panic spreads like a contagion. But notice exactly what the biblical text says the Israelites did next. Judges chapter 7, verse 21, contains one of the most stunning sentences in the history of warfare. It says, "Every man stood in his place around the camp. They did not charge down the hill. They did not draw hidden weapons. They did not rush into the fray. They stood exactly where they were. They held the light. They blew the trumpets, and they watched." The text says that the entire Midianite army ran. They cried out and fled. And as the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. The coalition destroys itself. In the darkness, the panic, and the chaos, they turn on each other and run toward the Jordan River. The battle is over, and Israel did not swing a single weapon. Pause for a second and look at how perfectly God has solved the central tension of the story. Remember his warning in verse 2. He reduced the army so that Israel could not boast and say, "My own hand has saved me." Look at their hands now. One hand holds a trumpet. The other hand holds a torch. Their hands are entirely occupied. They cannot boast about their strength because they literally could not fight. They could only stand in the dark and hold up the light. God did not just give them a victory. He gave them a victory that was mathematically, tactically, and physically impossible to take credit for. He dismantled their self-reliance so completely that the only rational response left was awe. But this story does not stop in the valley of Jezreel. The breaking of the jars, the shining of the light, and the weakness of the men was never just a historical anomaly. It was a theological blueprint. And hundreds of years later, the Apostle Paul would reach back to this exact imagery to explain the deepest mystery of human transformation. Hundreds of years after the silence returned to the valley of Jezreel, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to a church in Corinth. He was not writing about an ancient military battle. He was writing about the nature of the gospel and how human beings are actually transformed by it. But the imagery he used reached all the way back to that midnight victory on the hillside. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, Paul writes, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us." Jars of clay, earthen vessels. It is the exact same image Gideon's 300 men held in their hands in the dark. Paul understood the architecture of grace. He understood a pattern that runs through the entirety of Scripture. God does not pour his most profound light into golden chalices. He does not place his presence inside impenetrable, flawless armor. He places his treasure in dirt that has been baked in the sun. He places it in fragile things, things that crack under pressure, things that are easily broken. Why? For the exact same reason, God reduced Gideon's army from 32,000 frightened farmers down to 300. Paul explains the reason clearly in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 through 29. He says that God chooses what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chooses what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chooses what is low and despised. And then Paul gives the ultimate reason, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. This is the central discovery of the Gideon story. It was never just a historical record of an unlikely victory. It is a profound, almost uncomfortable portrait of how God actually saves us. We spend so much of our lives trying to gather our 32,000. We try to build up our resources. We try to hide our flaws. We want to present ourselves to God as strong, capable, and perfectly put together. We want to hand God an elite, disciplined army. We secretly think God needs our strength to accomplish His will. But God looks at our carefully constructed strength and says, "It is too much." He knows that if He delivers us while we feel powerful, we will quietly slip back into the deadly illusion that we saved ourselves. We will write songs about our own resilience. We will take the credit for the grace. So, God allows the numbers to dwindle. He allows our resources to fade. He permits us to reach the absolute end of our own capacity. He strips away the illusion of our independence until all we are holding is our own fragility. He does this because the ultimate victory over the darkness was never going to be won by human effort. Centuries after Gideon, another leader would step into a valley in the dark, but he would not carry a sword. He would allow his own body to be broken. The cross of Jesus Christ is the ultimate, final expression of the Gideon pattern. The world looked at the cross and saw only weakness, vulnerability, and utter defeat. But in the breaking of that vessel, the true light of the world was fully revealed, and the powers of darkness were entirely undone. Deliverance is not a reward for our bravery. It is a pure gift, given to those who are finally willing to admit they cannot save themselves. The broken jar is not a sign of our failure. It is the only way the light gets out. If this study helped you see the beauty of Scripture with fresh eyes, please subscribe so you can join us for the next discovery. The reduction of the army was never just a military tactic. It was the quiet, relentless grace of a God who breaks our pride so he can finally heal our hearts.